want you to applaud for Hank Gola, please. I don't need applause. I can feel the love in the room. One of the most prominent football columnists in this country. You see him on TV. He's been writing for the Daily News since his hair was dark, Gary Myers. And our sports editor for the Daily News, in like an insane, crazed, tortured New York Mets fans, Bill Price. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about this Super Bowl. We're going to talk about other Super Bowls. We're going to take your questions, and then there'll be 2 collections for the Daily News today. Actually, we're getting some questions from the web, and this is a good question to start off today. What's your most memorable experience covering the Super Bowl? We'll start with Gary.
I think it was I know it was the Giants-Bills game following the 1990 season. It was in Tampa, and it was one of those stadiums that if you waited until the end of the game to try to get to the locker room, you get stuck in all kinds of traffic going through the stands, and you wouldn't make a downtime. So at the 2-minute warning, I went down to the sidelines. And so I was to the right of the Giants bench when Scott Norwood attempted that 47-yard field goal, and I had a perfect angle to see that it went wide right, and to be able to observe the Giants' reaction as they realized the kick wasn't going to be good, and they won that game 20-19. I mean, that was a really neat experience because I'm not down on the field very often at the end of the game. I usually stay in the press box, but in this instance, I happened to go down, and it really created an indelible, spot in my memory. Of all, and this will be my 33rd consecutive Super Bowl, and that's the one moment that really stands out.
Billy, I don't even know what is your favorite football team?
I'm a Rams fan. Believe it or not.
All right, so
I'm a Los Angeles Rams.
All right,
fan,
so Bill, all right, let me ask you this because I was talking to Marshall Faulk yesterday, and I said, where were you, and were you watching when the Titans ended up on the 1-yard line? And he said he was on his knees. And he was like peeking. This is one of the great football players of all time. He's peeking through his eyes, and the guy ends up short of the goal line. Mm-hmm. And I said, were you in the same like fetal position the next year when Vinatieri lined up to kick? And he said, no, I figured I had it then. And he said the guy makes a field goal. What is your memory as a Ram fan of those 2 games?
Well, actually, I was in the game in Atlanta. I was at the game. Gary hooked me up with some tickets. Great seats, 50-yard line, of course. I couldn't see the play at the goal line because I had a 50-yard line, which I told Gary later. You should get me seats closer to the end of the game. So, but that, I was pretty much like Marshall Faulk. I was, a lifelong Rams fan. I couldn't believe they were in the Super Bowl. I was almost fainted. I was losing it as I saw Steve McNair drive the team.
All right, now you're a superstitious fan. How many people here actually think they can influence the outcome of sports events? So you do things. So, all right, how many people, when you're watching the game, walk out of the room in big moments because you can't bear to watch? Are you that kind of fan? You weenie. All right. All right. Did you do anything before the Titans lined up? We didn't know it was for sure it's going to be the last play.
Right.
But did you do anything superstitious?
No. I sort of like Marshall. I just put my head down and just.
So you wore it.
I was there. Oh, yeah.
All right, Hank. What's your biggest Super Bowl memory?
It's off the field, actually. And since we have Marshawn Lynch doing his little act this week.
I love him. No, don't act like he's bad.
No,
if
no.
he doesn't want to talk to me, I don't want to talk to him.
It's his prerogative. He had nothing to say anyway. But it goes back to 86, and, of course, the first guy, not to talk to the media, or one of the most famous, was Mark Bavaro.
Right.
If you remember. Now I can't get him off the phone when I talk to him, but back then he wouldn't say hi. So this was 86, and Mark Bavaro, believe it or not, is the reason they call it Media Day. 86 Giants get to Pasadena, and they're working out in Costa Mesa somewhere, and Media Day back then was called Picture Day, if you remember.
Oh, I do.
Picture Day. So Mark Bavaro, everybody's looking for him. The national media wants to talk to him. He's a big figure in the Giants that year, and nobody can find him. So we're looking all over for him. And there he was on the team bus, which you could still get to back then.
Right.
There was no security. And go up to me, Mark, they're looking for you out there. He says, it was picture day. It was picture day. I got my picture taken and left. So actually, the next year they did change it to Media Day, and I talked to him a couple of weeks ago. He said, "Well, you got to leave your mark on something." So,
all right, I have a couple, and one of them is not even mine. I was talking to Phil Simms a few years ago, and he's told this story many times. And I said, "What do you remember about that week before the game in Pasadena?" And he said, "I remember a question you asked." And I said, "What?" And he said, "We'd had a great week. Do you know the story? It's Thursday." He said, "I'm feeling good." He said, I feel like we have the best team by a lot. I've had a great week." And he said, "We're almost to the end of the session." And I don't even remember asking him. And I said to him, "If you lose this game, it's all going to be on you." And he said it's all he thought about from there until the rest of the week. And now, but my favorite Super Bowl memory is it's also Tampa and the Bills game. And by the way, I wrote about this the other day. How many Giants fans do we have here? Okay, those 8 days in January of '91 sort of have gotten eclipsed by the way the Giants have won their last 2 Super Bowls, and they probably were the greatest 8 days in the history of the franchise. They beat a 49ers team going for 3 Super Bowls in a row, 15-13 in Candlestick Park. They fly to Tampa, and then they beat a team that had won the AFC Championship game 51-3 and hold them to 19 points, okay? But I wasn't on the field with Gary. I had gone down, and I'm in the area because I can't bear to watch. And I'm a Giants fan from upstate New York, and I'm standing watching Norwood start to line up for the kick. And the late, great Vic Ziegel is standing next to me, and I'm like as nervous as a cat, and Vic says to me, he can't make that kick. And I said, well, wait, what do you mean he can't make the kick? It's 47 yards across. He said, no, I wrote a column about him the other day. He hasn't made a kick outdoors that long all year. Norwood kicks wide right. Vic goes, see, I told you. All right, another question. Other than Peyton Manning, this is a good question. John from Islip wants to know, other than Peyton Manning, who needs to have a huge game on Sunday for the Broncos to be successful? We'll start with Bill and we'll go right across.
The Broncos to be successful? I think no Sean Marino. I think the Broncos have to establish a running game. If they get into a point where Peyton has to throw 40, 50 times and they start pressure, I think the Broncos could be in trouble. I know Peyton's great, but if the Seahawks know he has to throw, the Legion of Boom could do some damage.
I think that Wes Welker has to go back and be as productive as he was in New England.
Not drop the ball he dropped in Indianapolis.
That's right. Because Richard Sherman, I think, is going to lock down Demaryius Thomas all game. I mean, I think he's going to be on him the whole game. And so they're going to try to take him away because he's the deep threat. He's the most dangerous of the receivers. But, Welker has a knack for getting open over the middle all the time, but he also has a knack for dropping passes, as we remember in the second Giants-Patriots Super Bowl. So I think Welker's a real key to this game.
Before we go to Hank, has anybody ridden the toboggan ride yet in Times Square? Because I know when the kids were little, when I used to think tobogganing, I'd think Times Square. Isn't that pretty much the way? All right.
that was supposed to be in Hackensack.
Yeah, they love me in Jersey this week. Okay.
I know, and I'm a Jersey guy, so watch your step.
No. See, no. Do we have any New Jersey people here? Okay. I love New Jersey. First of all, on the fun factor alone, you have the best politicians right now. Okay, just on a traffic cone shakedown level, you guys win. Okay, but even passionate New Jersey people know that the game is here because of New York. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
See, that was easy. All right, go ahead.
Yeah, but it's the Jersey taxpayers who are footing the bill.
Yes, and you know what? That's why the football players are afraid. They're afraid to come across the river because Peyton Manning feels that if he is stationary for more than 5 minutes, the new mayor is going to tax him. Go ahead.
All right.
But I digress.
I'm going to go to the other side of the ball. I think Terrence Knighton has to have a huge game for
Really?
the Broncos. Mr. Pot Roast. Because, obviously, the Seahawks offense runs through Marshawn Lynch. And while it looks like a power running attack that the Seahawks run, it's really a zone-based blocking scheme. Marshawn Lynch is a one-cut, get-up-the-field runner. They run that zone scheme. They just try to get him alone on a safety, get the linebackers caught up in a wash. But the way you beat that is if you get penetration. Terrence Knighton is a big guy in there, and he's been a monster in the playoffs. He's been pushing guys back in, exactly what you want to get penetration, and then to slice that zone blocking scheme in half.
Hank, as you can tell, is our X's and O's guy.
Yeah, about halfway through that, I just started to hear blah, blah, blah. You're going, like, that was, like, way too fast for me. I can't. That's why.
All right, we'll do this remedial. Okay.
All right, now listen. Here's an interesting question.
Terrence Knighton's the big
I've
guy.
thought about this week. Okay, this is an interesting question. Isn't it actually more impressive? Who's had the more impressive defensive performances in the run to the Super Bowl? Because the Broncos did have to beat, oh, by the way, Tom Brady. And they had to beat Phillip Rivers in a year when he's probably playing better than he ever has and had already beaten them one time. Now, I understand that the Seahawks beat Drew Brees and held them to, 15 points, and then they beat Kaepernick. But I don't think Kaepernick's great. I don't. And so is the Broncos' defense being overlooked in this game?
I think they're being overlooked because Seattle's defense is really one of the better ones of the last 20 years. So they get this game has been portrayed as the Denver offense against the Seattle defense. You know, 2 number ones ranked units, which hasn't happened very often. But I think that the Denver defense is underrated, and what they did, you're right, against New England. You know, a week after LeGarrette Blount had just carved up the Indianapolis defense. I don't remember. You probably remember the number. Would have held them to like 6 or 8 yards. Yeah. The Denver defense. So they do get overlooked in this game. They have probably played better than they really are in the playoffs, and they're going to have to do that again on Sunday. You know, the good thing I think for the Denver defense is I don't think that Seattle can beat if they shut down the Seattle running game. I don't think Seattle can beat Denver by throwing the ball. Russell Wilson is not quite at that point in his development. Now, he's a good player, and I think he's going to be a great player, but I don't think they can beat him throwing the ball. 2
points on that. You're right. But if they get Marshawn Lynch going, they're going to take a shot downfield because what they'll do with that is they're going to the line. And here I go. You could fall asleep again, Mike. If
No. I'm engaged. I just feel like a kid who showed up for a test and didn't study. But go ahead.
Just say it slower, Hank.
All right.
I'll dream about
Just
the toboggan run.
if you don't use big words, I think I can stay with you.
What were we doing? Oh, Russell Wilson. Okay, if Marshawn Lynch runs the ball the way he usually runs the ball, what they'll do is they'll take a couple of shots downfield with Russell Wilson running the bootleg outside. And what they do is he always keeps his eyes down the field, and then they'll slip a wide receiver behind the defense.
Sure, I got you. I'm with you.
And they'll take those shots down the field. Well, what they'll do is they call them shot plays. So in the first half, I would anticipate like 1 or 2 of those little play fake action, bootleg action, slip the receiver behind the defense, and take a shot at a big play.
All right, let's take a who's got a question out here? Anybody got a question? Yes. Who? Pete Carroll?
Oh, yeah.
First of all, do you think it was easy staying under the salary cap at USC? I don't, okay? No, it's I heard somebody talking about this the other day, Billy. The level of talent from top to bottom on this Seattle roster is pretty impressive.
I think the amazing thing about Pete Carroll, you know, we were doing a story about him a couple weeks ago, and it mentioned his age, that he's 62. And I was like, there's no way he's 62. But yet he's 62, but he clearly relates to these young guys on the team. You know, he's not to use Tom Coughlin as an example, but Tom Coughlin's older, and there seems to be some sort of gap.
It's not that much older.
Well, that's true. But Pete Carroll is like, you know, he's like a 30-year-old out there and running around, and I think these guys really relate to him.
It's so interesting to me. I was speaking to great Jerry Kramer, who ought to get him in the Hall. Can you get him in the Hall of Fame, you guys? Okay. And we were talking about Lombardi and Bill Walsh. So whatever short list you have of the greatest coaches of all time, Lombardi and Walsh. Vince Lombardi was either 55 or 56 when he walked away from coaching the Green Bay Packers. Bill Walsh, I think, was 57 when he walked away, and I think regretted it the rest of his life, that he had left too soon, because he wonders how many more they could have won. And it's just interesting, just generationally, how football has changed. That Pete Carroll now is a rookie in the Super Bowl at 61 or 62. 4 or 5 years passed when two legends of the game. All right, we got another question here.
Yeah, remember when Vermeil coached the one year? Everybody thought he was ancient.
Yeah, and Tom Coughlin clearly wants to coach forever.
Vermeil was ancient until Kurt Warner fell into his lap, of course.
Okay, this is a question from Steve over the internet. Okay, after all the talk about the weather, it looks like it's going to be a normal, like we have normal days here on Sunday. Basically, best case scenario for a cold weather Super Bowl. Do you want to see more cold weather cities get the big game, or should this idea be a one and done? Gary?
My opinion is I don't think it'll ever be in a cold weather city other than New York.
Don't tell that to Denver.
I know. The reason they put the game here to begin with was as a thank you to the Mara family, the Tisch family, and the Woody Johnson's family for building a $1.7 billion stadium without any to build it privately other than for the PSLs. Yeah. They didn't want to spend another $400 million to put a retractable roof on it. A lot of you are going to say, well, why wouldn't they do that?
It's such a beautiful stadium, too. They wouldn't have wanted to mar it.
Yeah, you don't want to mess it up by putting a roof on there so people can be comfortable. But they felt they weren't going to get their investment back, despite the fact that I think they would have been in the regular Super Bowl rotation. They would have been in a Final Four rotation. They could have gotten all kinds of concerts in the wintertime. But I just don't see the NFL putting this game in Chicago because the weather would be preposterous. I don't think they look at Philadelphia and Boston or Denver as cities they need to reward. It was a combination of a thank you to the Giants and Jets for building that stadium, and because this is New York, and there's only one New York, and they've been thinking about this since 9/11, I think those are the reasons it's here. And if they ever do put it in a cold weather city again, I think it would be here.
Well,
again.
and I wrote about this today. When you think about it, no place on the pro football map did more to grow this sport in this country than New York did. I mean, they played the original transformative game, the sudden death game. People old enough here to remember it. Mitch, you're old enough. You're like, no, I know. No, come on. Really, what was Jesus like? Okay, so, all right, okay. Sudden death, Colts, Giants, 1958. Made the sport a television sport in this country, okay? And then, by the way, the Giants of that era were nearly the Buffalo Bills. They lost 5 out of 6 championship games, but they were an incredibly glamorous team that people wanted to watch. And then when they stunk, who comes along? Oh, I know, Joe Namath, to win Super Bowl III and then play the second most transformative game. And even a few years ago, when it was the Patriots against the Giants in the first Super Bowl between them, one team's trying to go 19-0. The Giants are a 2-touchdown underdog. And at that point, and you can make a case that it's still the most dramatic Super Bowl ever played because they beat them in the last minute. So, yes, I think it was a thank you to the Mara family. But I also think it was a thank you to this area because you could talk about Green Bay or Chicago or Pittsburgh or Cleveland. I believe New York did more to grow pro football in this country. It's as much a capital of pro football as any other place there is. Okay.
Not to mention Lombardi being born here.
In Brooklyn.
In Brooklyn.
And then growing up in New Jersey and St. Cecilia's.
Oh, yeah.
All right.
And the rest stop?
This is from
the cemetery.
This is from Stephanie. There's been a lot of chatter about Peyton Manning's legacy. No, gee, I haven't heard anything about that. Where does he stand in your ranking of the top quarterbacks to ever play the game? And I'll preface this by saying I think it's the greatest conversation in sports. Quarterbacks gets people going more than any other It's like Willie, Mickey, and the Duke back in the 50s. All right, Bill, you start.
Well, he's at least in the top 5. You have Montana. You got to put Tom Brady in there, clearly. And I think it's ridiculous that this one game depends, where he ranks depends on how he does Sunday.
All right, who's your best?
I got to go with Montana.
Okay.
As much as I hate the 49ers because I am a Rams fan, I do have to go with Montana there. But
4-0 in the Super Bowl, 11 touchdown passes, no interceptions. Gary?
Well, my top 5, and I've written this in the Daily News many times, right now is Montana, Brady, Unitas, Elway, and Peyton Manning.
In that order?
In that order. Now, I feel if Peyton wins this game, my order then becomes Montana, Brady, Manning, Unitas, Elway. I'm one of those who really believes that quarterbacks are ultimately measured and judged and remembered by how many rings that they have, which is the major reason I don't have Dan Marino in the top 5, despite the fact that during his time he set all the records. I really think, even though it's a team sport, and they'll always tell you that quarterbacks are ultimately responsible for wins and losses. And if Peyton, who was the greatest regular season quarterback in NFL history, retires with only one championship, I really think that's a blemish on his resume.
But like, let's say it's all right. If he throws for 500 yards, clearly, what if it's a Bills-Giants sort of game, a 2019, like Roethlisberger had against the Seahawks a couple of years ago, and they Broncos still win? Does it matter how he performs, or is just the win count no matter what?
I think when we remember Peyton Manning, 5 years from now or 10 years from now, we're not going to remember this game if he wins it. We're just going to remember that he won it. And if he loses it, and they lose on a last-second field goal, and he's thrown for 350 yards and 3 touchdowns, we're not going to remember that. We're going to remember that the Broncos lost it, and that's how he'll be remembered. It's not necessarily fair, but it's just the rules of the game.
Yeah, Bradshaw. Yeah.
Because I think the perception of Terry Bradshaw, for the most part, was that not that he was along for the ride, because he did play well in some of those Super Bowls, especially against Dallas, is that he, during the course of his career, he was not a great quarterback. He got benched early on for Joe Gilliam. That he's just not looked at in the same way. And he played with probably, if you want to judge like the teams of the decades, the Packers of the 60s, the Steelers of the 70s, the 49ers of the 80s, Cowboys
Redskins
of the 90s.
too. Redskins. Joe Gibbs won 3 Super Bowls with 3 different quarterbacks.
Right, but that wasn't all. I'm just saying in the decades that you can make a case easily that the Steelers of the 70s were the greatest team of all time, but Bradshaw is not looked at as the greatest.
But Gary, I'll tell you something about Terry Bradshaw, and here's the thing. I completely agree with you that more than any of the guys in the conversation, he was more a product of the team. But there was always a point in every one of those 4 Super Bowls where there was a moment where he said to either Swan or Stallworth, "You go long and I'll get it to you," and he did.
Well, there's a great line in the NFL Films video of the Rams-Steelers Super Bowl. The Steelers are losing, and John Facenda says, "Great teams aren't always great. They're just great when they have to be." And that's what
And
reminds
that's
me
a
of Terry
game, by the
Bradshaw.
way, that your team wins if Nolan Cromwell doesn't drop an interception.
Yeah, I
Go
know.
ahead. Who
I
do you
know.
think?
I agree with all the names. Montana far and away. I mean, what he did in the Super Bowl is amazing. I throw Otto Graham in there.
Well, no, he's number 6 on my list just because of what I know of his career. Here's what I'll say about Peyton. And I'm a Montana guy. Gary and I, we covered all those games, okay? And we were there when he took him down the field against the Bengals. We were there when he threw it to Dwight Clark. I was behind the end zone that day. And when the ball left his hand, I thought it was going out of the stadium.
And just as an aside, one of us wrote a book about that game. And there's a Barnes & Noble down the street, too, I think.
If Peyton Manning wins this game, and he's got 2 Super Bowls won, 3 Super Bowls played, 500 career touchdown passes. This season, this second act, 5 MVPs. Have they given the MVP out yet for this year? No.
It could be announced Saturday night.
Okay,
Tomorrow night.
all right. So probably his 6th MVP this year. When you combine the whole thing, and since there's no right answer, that's the great thing about quarterbacks. There's no right answer here. He is allowed to walk away from the sport if he walked away right now and said, "I'm the best to ever play the game." And Bill Polian made a great point the other day in talking about Super Bowls. He said Greg Maddux just won 355 games in the big leagues. He said he and Glavine won like 680 games between them. He said, do they really need one more World Series to validate their greatness? And Gary's list is all of our list. Okay, it's Unitas, Manning, Brady, Elway, all those guys. And Bill Polian said, if you're sitting in that first-class section, does it really matter whether you're in the first row or the second row or the third row? To be in this conversation is pretty great. All right, this is Pete from Manhattan. What is the best city for hosting a Super Bowl?
New Orleans.
Oh, yeah.
Not even close. That's like Montana.
Plus, you
Montana
can walk to the
quarterbacks.
game. It's a great American city, and you can walk to the
And
game.
everything is there. You got gambling.
Nope.
You got everything. You got great restaurants. Not even a question.
I've always said the perfect Super Bowl would be Monday through Saturday in New Orleans and the game in the Rose Bowl in Pasadena, because that is just a spectacular setting.
For all the people, by the way, who are going to complain about getting over to the game, try getting to the Rose Bowl ever for a big game.
It has to be New Orleans. I was in at the Final Four a couple years ago. Just a great city, great atmosphere. You know, it's Super Bowl week is it's more than just a game. It's a big party, and there's no better city to have a party.
They do
in
have
New
a little
Orleans.
problem at the Superdome keeping the lights on.
Right. Hank, how's the golf in New Orleans?
You can still play that time of year.
All right, anybody got a question? Yes.
What if Seattle has a 1990s Giants kind of a game with the ball control, and Seattle ultimately wins the game? Does that affect Peyton Manning's legacy?
Well, why don't you answer?
Okay, here's what I think. When you look back on that game, okay, and that's the last time we have the defense that had given up the fewest points against the offense that had scored the most points. And, Parcells had told us all week, power wins. Power still wins in the sport. They did not feel intimidated. This idea that they didn't know if they could beat the Bills, they felt like they had played them once in the preseason, they played them once in the regular season. That's a game where Phil Simms got hurt. And Jim Kelly somehow is viewed as losing this game. Jim Kelly put up 19 points in 19 minutes. And if Everson Wall doesn't make a open field tackle on Thurman Thomas before the field goal, Norwood would have had 42, 40, 37, because there was some open field in front of him. I don't think it's going to be that kind of game. But I do agree with Bill Belichick when he says, and I want the guys to talk about this, you can't play Peyton Manning from behind. He said, we go out in the championship game. They run like 24 plays to our 6, and he said we were pushing a rock up the hill the rest of the game. So it sounds like a simple fact of life. Don't play from behind. But he said Peyton and Denver are a great front-running team. Right. And if they get on top of you, they really get on top of you.
That's why the Seahawks will try to get on top early with those plays that I talked about before. Running the ball, taking a shot downfield, see if you get an early touchdown, and then have Peyton be a little impatient against that defense.
Well, we saw that in the New England game where I think it was the beginning of the third quarter where they just kept the ball forever. And he's really perfected the short passing game, I think, even more so than when he was in Indianapolis. Just moving the chains with those short little passes and having Welker in that role really helps a lot. I think Denver's a very frustrating offense to play against because even though Peyton is not going to run, he's very good at feeling the rush and buying himself some time. And we saw in that last drive against San Diego where he completed those 2 third and longs that even when you think you have him stopped, he's capable of.
But I will say this about the rush. Early in that game, Chandler Jones was just out there, and he could feel him. And early in the game, before Talib got hurt, is when Peyton had some problems. Right. He wasn't on his game.
But they never really put him down. I mean, they never
put
sat
him
him down the whole game,
but
and you can't play him like that.
But that's Seattle's, the way they're looking at this. Just have his antenna get up. Just have him think about you. And again, the Colts game, when they lost in Indianapolis, he was thinking about Mathis all day.
When Pat Riley coached the Knicks, and I'm talking about the Oakley, Mason, Knicks, his philosophy was the refs aren't going to call everything, okay? So keep fouling. So that's when you see the Seattle defenders holding on every play, that's part of it. But here's the other thing. Riley used to have all these stats about what shooting percentages, how they went down with a hand in somebody's face because he preached a hand in the face. And if you play Peyton Manning without a hand in his face and without any kind of contact, I don't see how you can win that game.
Yeah, he'll kill him. He'll pick him apart if if he has time to do whatever he can. Gary, you brought it up. I think the word is frustrating. You watched that Patriot game. It was close enough where if the Patriots could get a stop and get the ball back, they might have had a chance. But they never did. And I think the way Seattle's defense is, they're obviously with Sherman a very emotional team. If they start getting frustrated, they start pressing, they might beat them on a long pass, and they may take them out of their game.
It's who frustrates who, really.
Right.
Because the Seahawks could just as well frustrate Peyton and a whole. Read my rub route story in today's Daily News, by the way. Talk about
we really haven't written, or nobody's really written a story this week. Can Peyton Manning be rattled? That's like the cliched story.
You had all week to write that, Gary.
I know, but it's a cliched story.
Who stopped you?
No,
He can't be rattled, but he can be effective.
No, my point is that we were writing those stories about Tom Brady before the Giants played him the first time. Can Brady be rattled? And everything. No, he can't be rattled.
And he
we
was.
saw it.
And
you
he
know,
was,
The
yeah.
Giants just knocked him around pretty
Who hit
good.
him? Was it OC who hit? Was it OC who hit him on the first play from scrimmage and put him down?
Yeah, and he
was
was
OC,
looking
wasn't it?
for Strahan and Tuck and OC the whole game. And I think if Seattle hits Peyton early, that they can cause a little
Well,
bit
here's
of
the
happy
other thing.
feet and looking over his shoulder.
I agree,
Yeah.
but Belichick talked about this because he was the defensive coordinator, obviously, for the Giants in Tampa, and he really does believe that the greatest pressure you can put on Peyton is keep him off the field. Because if you make him play obviously putting him down, getting in his face is huge, but it happened to Kelly in Tampa where all of a sudden you're realizing I don't have much time in this game. I don't think he was standing there thinking, gee, they've got the ball twice as much as we did. But the Giants had that long drive in the second quarter, long drive to start the third quarter, and all of a sudden, and Belichick says, Peyton's not going to get rattled, but anybody who has to play with a little more hurry up and a little more urgency, it affects the game.
Make a
Yeah,
mistake,
you're right.
yeah.
If you go back to that Brady game against the Giants, one thing that people forget about is he played with that bad ankle.
Right.
And the Giants threw all that pressure up the middle. If you remember, Spagnuolo's whole game plan was to just blitz up the middle with Kiwanuka, delayed blitzes and everything. He couldn't move, and that's one of the reasons he was rattled as well.
Hank, I know you saw a couple Broncos games this year.
6, I think.
6. I mean, I don't. People could talk about the Seattle defense. You watch them; they just seem that they're up another level than any other defense in the league. I mean, those guys, they're not a dirty team, but they hit and they will hit you hard.
Are you
every
talking about
time.
the Broncos defense?
No, the Seattle defense.
Oh, Seattle defense. Yeah, I mean, they do. They're so unique in what they do because they can keep the same personnel on the field and keep the same kind of philosophy with it, whether they're in man or 3 deep and whatever they do, or when they shift. Here's one thing to watch if you're looking for a little X and O thing. When they shift into their 5-man line, they could bring a. Here we go. You all right?
Yeah, I'm fine.
Okay. When they shifted to their 5-man line, they could bring a lot of pressure from the edge and mix it up. So that's one thing that they'll try to do. That's just an example of how versatile that team
I
is.
just
We
mean
should
when
have
you
got him a chalkboard here.
Yeah.
when you watched on
Like
champion.
he's got like his channeling like the inner Gruden, like no X or O has ever been less than totally fascinating to him.
It is
I'm just saying
fascinating.
on Championship Sunday, you had the Broncos-Patriots game, which was a great game. You watched that 49ers-Seahawks game. It's like you were watching.
Oh, yeah.
You were watching a real football game.
Well,
Those
here's
guys-
the thing.
Those guys
and
were
Bill,
hitting hard.
Bill, you know this. Bill Parcells said this the other day. He said the thing he loves about the Seahawks defense, and Belichick feels the same way, and if you're going to talk about defensive football, you talk to those two guys, says they're not going to show up and try to trick anybody on Sunday. He said they're not going to show up and say, we've got 5 exotic Rex Ryan blitzes. They're going to do what they're going to do, and they say, you got to beat us doing what we do.
And one thing about the Seahawks defense as well, I mean, all the rules changes have been shifted toward the offense, taking the intimidation factor out. Well, the Seahawks have brought the intimidation factor
Mike
back in.
Westhoff said the defensive backs hold on every play.
And they do get away with
But
it.
they've
too.
got this is an officiating crew that's going to call stuff. This is a flag happy officiating.
But
crew.
I
We'll see what they do with those pick plays the Broncos run, too. That's going to be another thing.
I think they tend to let them play in Super Bowls.
Yeah.
I do, but you know what? Here's the thing, and I don't think I don't agree with Bill Belichick. I don't think that it was a dirty play from Welker, but it's an illegal play that they run all the time. Those picks are illegal, and they've now. It's almost like they've been grandfathered into the way they do business. So you've got the Seahawks holding on every play, and you've got the Broncos running one illegal pick after another. And I want to see if they're going to call the picks.
They're
on
not
Sunday.
illegal if you just run them. If you go out of your way and adjust the route to go into the DB, that's
Which
illegal.
Welker did.
Which he
Welker
did on that play.
Yes, he did.
But the idea, why it's called a rub route is because they're basically trying to rub shoulders with each other, and that's not illegal. You're
But
just running
Hank,
the
you
guy
know
out.
that what they do,
Oh,
it's
absolutely.
it's the give a mouse a cookie theory of, because then they want a piece of cake.
You know,
and they get away with murder on
And
it.
it's kind of funny that they did it against the Patriots because the reason all the rules were changed is
It's
because
'cause of the
Belichick
yes,
had
sir.
mauled all those receivers when they played Peyton the first time.
All right, this is from Kevin from Brooklyn. Who is the player who hasn't been talked about this week? I think the only player who hasn't been talked about this week is Bronco Nagurski. Who is the player who hasn't been talked about this week who could end up being the big hero or the GOAT of the game? We'll start at the end and work this
Well,
way.
Mike, you wrote it today. Russell Wilson. It's amazing. He's the starting quarterback in the Super Bowl.
The other guy, yeah.
He's the other guy. No one's even talked about him. It's been Peyton Manning, Marshawn Lynch, Richard Sherman. You know, the amazing thing about Russell Wilson, and I know you expressed how you felt about Kaepernick before. When Russell Wilson starts scrambling, he looks like Fran Tarkenton, but a defense knows he could run or he could still throw. Kaepernick, when he starts running, you know he's running.
Billy, Bill's making an interesting point because Kaepernick beats the Packers because he gets outside. Russell Wilson beats you when he gets outside. But why they're allowed to get outside, Belichick always said that the game is won in the middle of the field. So if they let him get to the outside, Gary, if they let him get to the outside on Sunday, they're going to get hurt.
He does, for a young guy, he really is extremely adept at throwing on the run and creating so much time for himself, extra time for himself to find receivers downfield. And then if he can't, he's extremely elusive and he's quick. So he's very dangerous. The only thing that you worry about a guy like this going into a game like this, and it used to happen to Brett Favre all the time when Mike Holmgren had to calm him down at the beginning. When you're exposed to this atmosphere for the first time, and this is completely different than a playoff game. It's much different than a conference championship game. A young guy going in, you have to be concerned about him making mistakes early, which is why I think Seattle will be very conservative
Gary,
in the beginning.
he did. I agree with you. Anybody who thinks the championship game is a Super Bowl has no clue, okay? But the kid did fumble on the first offensive play he had against the 49ers and got up off the mat and then finally completed that fourth down pass. Who's the guy? Who's the guy that really hasn't gotten much love or attention this week?
Percy Harvin.
Yeah. This would be a third game of the year?
Yeah.
Third game of the year.
I mean, we've hardly heard about him, but he's a presence on the field, and there's a guy who could beat you vertically. And, again, if they get lunge going and bring those linebackers up, then there's going to be shots at play action.
You're talking about one of the kids in their first or second year right now?
Well, since you got an Eagles hat on, Nick Foles.
I think it's definitely Andrew Luck.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you what, your guy, because of what Peyton did this year, people were losing sight of what Nick Foles was doing. Those are stats. Touchdowns. What was it? 29 and 2.
Yeah, the interception rate so down. Yeah,
29 and 2, right? Mm-hmm. We may go 10 or 15 or never and see a guy with stats like this. Who you like Luck the best? Who you like out of the young guys?
I think it's got to be Luck. I was going to say Geno Smith to see if anyone was paying attention, but it's clearly Luck. It's amazing. He is the next Peyton Manning. He's in Indianapolis, and of course you can't forget Johnny Football was going to be the greatest player ever play in the NFL.
You know who doesn't like Johnny Football is Jaws. Ron Jaworski is very not down on him, but he thinks he's the third best guy. Any other questions for? Yes. No. And I think it's good to have a reboot with the offensive coordinator. I think it's good to have a reboot with a new quarterbacks coach. I think that the way they were playing, the way they insisted on playing, was going against what we were seeing. And, the modern game now, when you talk about the modern game in pro football, you're basically talking about the last 2 years. My friend Doug Flutie was saying the other day he loves all this stuff about the new offense. He says, yeah, it's the way we used to play in Canada. Right. They basically brought Canadian football down here. But that's a long way of saying this guy's got too much talent, too much arm to be through after one season like this.
Yeah, they got to change the offense. It's got to be quick release. They were in the dark ages with that with the downfield vertical passing game all the time. It's
like they were running Al Davis's old Raiders offense.
Yeah, it just doesn't work anymore.
I think it'll benefit Eli to hear a new voice now after the same system for 10 years, and I just think he had gotten stale, and there were other extenuating circumstances around the Giants this year. Their offensive line was just terrible. Akeem Nicks was invisible the entire year. The tight end, they've had production from tight ends forever, but they didn't this year. So I think he's still young enough that he can flip the switch with a new system and still be extremely productive.
I was the president of the Geno Smith fan club.
And there was no vice president.
It was the committee meetings, the board meetings were extremely small, they were extremely quick, and then there were no board meetings in the middle of the season when I thought to myself, whew, the guy you like so much, he might suck, Mike. And then and then he finished strong, but I'm telling you, if you listen to Idzik and you listen to Ryan, they don't know. They don't know, okay? And when they say they're going to look at other quarterbacks, if you've got your I don't think Chip Kelly in Philly is saying, oh, yeah, we're going to look at other quarterbacks. No, he's going to look at Nick Foles. And so, listen, would I love to see Johnny Football here? Yes, because I think he's the real deal. He's the most exciting player I've seen in college football since my guy from BC. So I like the way Smith came back at the end. I like the way he finished. And I'll just say one more thing about this, and then I'll let the guys talk about this. I said at the start of the year that even if the Jets went 3-13, but they left the season feeling like they had their quarterback, then they had won. Except now they end up 8-8, and they leave the season not sure if they've got their quarterback.
Well, here's the thing: if they had finished 3-13, they couldn't have felt that they had their quarterback, right?
But if he had, statistically had played better, had like a 400-yard game, or those.
This season was really dedicated to finding out about Geno Smith.
But they didn't find out about
Didn't
it.
find anything
Exactly.
out, right.
They won a lot more games than I thought they were going to win, but the major goal at the end of the year was not accomplished because he was so up and down. And even at the end, when he cut down the mistakes, but there's just something about him I don't like. And maybe it's because my first impression of him, I saw him play in person in the Pinstripe Bowl against my team, Syracuse, in his senior year. And it was cold and windy and snowy that day. And he looked like he wanted to be any place else but Yankee Stadium that day. And I was thinking, boy, if he gets drafted by a Northeast team, this is going to be trouble because he just didn't look like he liked playing those in the elements. And now he's in the elements.
Yeah, he's the anti-Foles.
And it's not,
You
it's
got
obvious.
a guy who's consistent in everything. I mean, you never know what you're going to get from Geno Smith from one game to the next.
Right. And it's not fair to compare him to, Peyton Manning or say he could be a franchise quarterback. But just look at him compared to a Russell Wilson. Do you ever see him getting even to that level?
Right.
Wilson or Kaepernick?
All right, we have a question. Ted from London.
Oh.
I'm visiting and don't know which team to support. What would your advice be for a puzzled Englishman? And let me ask 3 puzzled Americans, starting with Hank Gola.
Well, if he wants to go the crazy route, because I know they're kind of crazy over there, especially with their premiership.
It's not
teams.
really a zany country.
But the Seahawks fans are absolutely nuts.
They are nuts, yeah.
So
That's like a Premier League soccer crowd.
exactly.
That's
That's-
probably
so-
the closest we have.
So that's why I would go there. He could fit right in with those guys.
Well, if he just wants to jump on a bandwagon, then he roots for Denver and Peyton Manning.
Rooting for Peyton Manning to win another Super Bowl.
Yeah, I like the Seattle angle. It seems, like you said, like a soccer team.
Yeah.
Probably some hooligans that'll be at the stadium on a Sunday.
Here's my worry, okay? And if there's any golf fans here, we were talking about this. Hank's a big golfer. Phil Mickelson was supposed to win the Open at Marion, okay? Phil Mickelson was supposed to complete his career. Everybody in America was rooting for him. It was all set up, and then somebody else won. And I'm so worried that it looks like this should be Peyton's time and that his team might not win this game on Sunday. But I want him to win because I want him to close up whatever loophole anybody thinks is in his resume and said, if you want to pick Montana, good. You want to pick Elway, my boss, good. You want to pick Brady? And again, we were talking about this before. The Patriots are to be in 5-0 in the Super Bowl. Brady's 5-0. He's the greatest quarterback of all time. Belichick's 5-0. He's the greatest coach of all time. And 19-0 is the greatest team in the greatest season of all time. And it all changed maybe because the ball stayed an inch off the turf that night at University of Phoenix Stadium in Arizona. That's so we may see that. There may be one play that changes everything. Who's got a question? Well, let me say this before I'll let the guys answer this. Are you aware that he had already said the same thing to ESPN Deportes? He had made the same rant. So it wasn't. We've given him a lot of slack because it was heat of the moment. This was like take 2 with Aaron Andrews.
Well, he also said very similar things in the production meeting with the Fox people before the game.
Right. Right.
So he didn't quite have the piece of paper in front of him with the script, but he had it memorized.
All right, well, this comes from a question from Michael. Who will win the marquee battle on the field? I'm not sure if this is the marquee battle. Demaryius Thomas or Richard Sherman? And if it's Demaryius Thomas, Bill, will that make Richard Sherman the Fred the Hammer Williamson of Super Bowl 48?
I think Sherman wins that battle. I mean, Sherman.
Oh, you do?
I think Sherman is well, he was a big talker for whatever it was, 18 seconds with Aaron Andrews, and he's toned it down. He is a great player. He is a dangerous player, and I think he will win the battle. And if he doesn't win the battle, then the Seahawks are sunk.
There may not be a battle. Sherman stays on one side. There are ways to get away.
Is he even? Wait, let me ask you this: Is he even their best defensive back, or is it Earl Thomas, or is it Cam Chancellor, who's a linebacker masquerading as a defensive back?
And Maxwell's pretty good too on the other side.
Yeah.
They're just all good, really. So, but Sherman's got length. And the thing with Sherman is if he gets into you on the line, which is what they're going to try to do, and get the jam, he's terrific.
By the way, which Giant? You guys knew this, okay? Which Giant fan knew that Malcolm Smith, who actually intercepted the ball at the end of the NFC Championship game, was Steve Smith's younger brother? And when I went back and read back on Steve Smith, I found out something I'd forgotten, Gary. He made some very big catches in the first Giants-Patriots Super Bowl.
I think he had a big third down catch on that last
I think
drive.
he had more than one third down
Yeah.
catch across the game. And they both went to SC. But did you know that before he intercepted that ball, that he was Steve's kid brother? You are the pro football columnist for the Daily News.
I was going to say, I don't want to disappoint you, but I did know that.
Because I have a lot on my mind, so I can't be on top of all
Right.
these
I
things.
try to
right,
keep you
Bill?
informed of
That's
everything.
why
Oh, you're very
I
busy.
need my
Yeah,
editors, right?
You mentioned Richard Sherman, and there's been this talk about him and Revis this week. Do you think the Broncos will treat Sherman like Revis and just stay away from him, or can they afford to do
They're going
that?
to try to put him in motion. They'll put him in these bunch formations. But Sherman doesn't follow a guy, so you could get away
Right.
from him. He
Yeah.
stays on one side.
By the way, speaking of the Richard Sherman play at the end of the NFC Championship game, apparently Jim Harbaugh, in the biggest moment of the year for his team, is going to continue to throw fades to Michael Crabtree on the right side of Gary until they finally get it right.
Well, it didn't work in the Super Bowl. It didn't work in the championship games. He was going backwards. Maybe next year won't work in the divisional round.
How about this? And I'm watching the game. You were at the
We're all Denver.
You were at the Denver. Okay, I'm watching the game. Do you guys did this occur to anybody here? Vernon Davis catches the ball at the 18-yard line, first down, and there are 49 seconds left on the clock, and the 49ers have 2 timeouts left. The ball was snapped on the pass that ended up getting interception 20 seconds later, and I'm wondering, why don't you call a timeout there? And then Kaepernick said, we got the matchup we wanted. Really? Against Richard Sherman?
Yeah.
A guy's desperate to be famous? I don't think so.
I was talking to Pete Carroll the other day, and I said, this whole rant that Richard Sherman has really overshadowed the fact that the guy is a great player.
He's a great player.
Oh,
Yeah.
terrific.
And,
With a great story, by the way, that was more than his rant. A
Right.
great life story.
Right. And oftentimes when you have a talker like Richard Sherman, you forget how good he is on the field. And despite that, the fact that he made a tremendous play on the ball in the championship game, all people remember really is the stuff that he said after the game. One more thing about that play, and I think Kaepernick has said this also. He puts a little bit more air under the ball, and it goes about another yard. That's a touchdown.
Oh, yes, but all you had heard in the run-up to the game was that's the kind of pass you want to make Kaepernick try to make, which is you want him to
touch-
float.
the touch
A
throw.
touch
Perfect,
pass
right.
is not his strong suit. You ask him to throw a ball through a building or a hard wind, he can do that. But twice now, his team's gotten beaten on touch passes.
And look at the touchdown he threw to Anquan Bolden earlier in the
Yeah.
day. That just got
Amazing
over
throw.
Thomas
Yeah.
just off the fingertips. And again, he drilled that to the back.
All
of the
right,
end zone.
listen,
Could
we-
have been intercepted as well.
We got about 3 minutes left. And who else got a question? Yes. I think Rex Ryan's going to be.
Yeah, I think Rex is going to hang on.
Yeah,
I agree with
so
that.
too.
No, the owner's got a man crush on him. I mean,
Yeah.
Yes, I do. Yes, I do.
No, that'll
No,
that'll never
no.
happen.
No. It's like shutting Richard Sherman up. Win or lose. It's, no. These are guys that don't run out of saliva. Go ahead. You know what? I actually like Romo. I like the coach. They keep changing the coordinators. I like Jason Garrett. I think he's in a really tough spot. And I think that Romo, what was ironic about the game against the Eagles, when Orton threw the interception, then you're thinking, well, it doesn't matter who's playing quarterback for the Cowboys. Somebody's going to throw the pick.
Right.
Yeah.
But I actually think that the problem with the Cowboys is not Tony Romo. And I have great admiration for Jerry Jones as a businessman, for what he's built. I love his stadium. Somehow he built a retractable roof stadium for $1.2 billion, and we got the big ugly gray bowl for $1.7 million. But I think he's got to bring Gary. He's got to bring in a football guy. He's got to and not only bring him in, but empower him and listen to him.
Get out of the way.
The closest he's come since Jimmy Johnson is when he had Bill Parcells there.
Yeah.
And Bill, as intimidating as he can be, still couldn't talk him out of signing T.O. And Jerry's never going to give up the power, no matter what happens.
Yeah, I know it's something.
Yeah. First of all, Romo has probably one of the toughest jobs in sports. Quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys. All eyes are on you. Second of all, when I talk to all the old Cowboys, I if you put together all these vignettes on the Super Bowl that ran in yesterday's special section, they're all saying, look, Jerry's got to get out of the way and let the football people be football.
Let me ask, Gary's written so much about the old Cowboys, and I was talking to Jerry Rice about this yesterday. Those Cowboys 49ers games, the 80s and 90s, are as good as anything I ever saw. The Cowboys thought they might be getting Roger Staubach with Tony Romo, but did they get Danny White instead?
You know, it's a great analogy because I think Romo is terrific for the first 55, 56 minutes of the game, and then when it's on the line, you can almost predict that he's going to throw an interception. Danny White had a very difficult job taking over for Staubach, who was as beloved a figure in an NFL city as any player has ever been, and he got them to 3 straight NFC Championship games, and they lost all 3 on the road: Philadelphia, San Francisco, and Washington. And Cowboy fans have never forgiven him for that.
All right, this
Staubach loves Romo, by the way.
last question, and thanks to everybody from the Daily News and Modell's and Mitch Modell for showing up early. Thank you all for coming up. All right, now, I don't want to put any pressure. Who wants to ask? No, I'll ask the last question. Forget it. Who's going to win the game?
Seahawks win 24-20.
I think Denver will win 24-16.
Seahawks 24-21. So you
all
almost
right.
stole my score there, but that's what I said in the paper today.
I only ever pick the way I'm rooting, and I'm going to pick Peyton Manning 27-21, and I hope it's because he takes his team down the field at the end and has one of those moments in the Super Bowl that so many great quarterbacks in the conversation we had today. Thank you all for coming. I hope you had a good time.
That was fun.